Hello and welcome to Healing Tips from the Heart, Intuition with Helpers, Healers, and Guides. I am your host, Dr. Lori Hops, licensed psychologist, writer, and artist. I've explored mind, body, and spirit related to intuition, or your personal guidance system, since early childhood. Meet my guests who have learned from their personal and professional lives to explore vast realms of knowing, synchronicities, and overcoming challenges. Their stories may inspire you with tools to enhance your daily living and relationships. Hello, everyone, and welcome my special guest for today, Debra Hurt. Debra has been associated with Energy Kinesiology since 1986 with Touch for Health, and we'll be talking about what that means soon. She's a facilitator for 3-in-1 concepts and has been a longtime student and teacher of energy medicine with Donna Eden. She has been a member of the International and National Energy Kinesiologists since 1989 and holds the highest designation available in that organization. And she's also contributed for many years to their ethics committee. She has a private practice in Bend, Oregon, and travels throughout the U.S. teaching and also seeing clients. If that's not enough, Debra also likes to combine artwork with energy, which sounds just fascinating, and I need to know more about that. And she has written a workshop for performers and workshops on the chakras and on combining energy work with political activism. She has several books on energy dynamics for performers, on the chakras, and all of that information will be listed in the program notes so you can get a hold of her books and other information about her. So welcome, Debra. It's so good to see you.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here. And I want the audience to know, although I was in the same physical space with you a few months ago, our paths didn't cross, but I have had the wonderful opportunity to present with you on a panel online. And so I kind of got to know a little bit more about your work there. And I was so impressed that I knew I needed to reach out and say hello. And I'm so glad that you're here and I get to share your work with this audience.
Oh, thank you for those kind words.
So
one of the things that I always like to say to students or to really anybody, I'll talk to anybody about this, is that I stand on the shoulders of giants. And whatever I have to offer, whatever I know, came from people who came before me, who put in a lot of hard work and a lot of research and a lot of clinical experience. And I've been very fortunate in how I was positioned in terms of time and in terms of availability to work with some really extraordinary people. And I'm so grateful for that.
Thank you for that, for being so generous and recognizing the lineage. And I'm sure that you've trained people who feel the same about you. So well, it continues.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, because we're all connected to one another. You know, and the people that we teach and train affect us too. And so we teach and train differently, you know, so it's hopefully it's an ongoing collaborative process. But thank you for saying that. Yeah. So can you let us know a little bit more about some of these ideas that maybe are new to us?
Sure.
So like, for example, what is applied kinesiology?
So applied kinesiology is probably best known as the muscle testing practice used by chiropractors. So there's a little known lineage in terms of muscle testing that many people, even in the field, don't know. There was a physical therapist in the early 20th century around 1907, 1908, during the polio epidemic, whose name was Wilhelmina G. Wright. And she really is the mother of kinesiology.
Ah.
So, though very few people know about her, she was doing muscle response testing with her polio patients, both children and adults. And she found that based on the feedback that she got from the muscles, she could determine what was the best course of treatment for those people. And she was able to tailor their treatment to their needs. And this made her effectiveness skyrocket. So she was working under a physician. I want to say his name was Robert Lowell, but that might not be quite accurate. But I think it was Robert Lowell. And he encouraged her to publish her findings. And as you might imagine, being a woman at the turn of the century, her work was rejected. And so he said, well, I'll publish with you. He was an MD, so he submitted the work with her name first, his name second. The work appeared without her name at all.
Oh.
So she disappeared into the sands of time, but she really gave us those first techniques for looking at the response in the muscles and how they relate to structure and function, and then later, as people start thinking in energy terms, energy. So Dr. George Goodhart in the 1960s was a very curious person, and he was familiar with some of this research that came through physical therapy and started to apply it. And so applied kinesiology became the tool that he used and then taught other chiropractors. So he had a group of 12 guys that he worked with on a monthly basis, and they would workshop information and they'd go back to their clinics and try it out, and then they'd bring it back. And of course, it was the 60s, so they referred to themselves as the Dirty Dozen. And I know at least one of them is still living, Dr. Sheldon Deal, who lives in Tucson, Arizona. But many of them have passed now. But one was Dr. John Thie, who was the author of the book Touch for Health. And Touch for Health was his attempt to create a reference for his patients, because he felt that if they could work with certain energy systems, if they could work with simple techniques to affect the meridian system, for example, in between appointments, that they'd make better progress and they'd make progress faster. And he took a lot of heat for that, as you might imagine. And it was never his intent that that book would go on to spawn a whole other occupation in energy kinesiology, but that is exactly what it did. And Touch for Health is where I started. And 3-in-1 Concepts work, which I also do, was one of the children, so to speak, of Touch for Health. So many of the energy kinesiologies that we know today came from that central trunk of Touch for Health, which came out of chiropractic, which came out of physical therapy. So the beauty of the energy testing or muscle testing or muscle monitoring or muscle checking, it goes by many different names, is that the muscles work on an all or nothing basis, kind of like a light switch. So a muscle fiber is either on or off. So when we turn it on and off manually, which we can do easily, we know that that muscle is talking to the brain. And we also know that muscles have the ability to respond to stress. So, for example, if you have something very stressful to tell someone, what's the first thing that you say to them?
Are you sitting down?
Are you sitting down? Yeah, because we know instinctively that when that news hits the system, when it's perceived by the individual, there is a chance that for an instant the muscles can shut off and the person could fall. So in energy kinesiology, we've harnessed that ability of the body to talk about its stress really directly. which is a huge benefit, because when people come in for whatever reason, whatever limitation that's bothering them, whatever stress they have going on, it is enormously helpful to be able to give them that direct feedback from their body. I'm very fond of Bruce Lipton's quote, which I think has been updated by James Doty now, so I'll try to remember the new numbers, that the conscious mind, what we're consciously aware of, takes in about 40 bits of incoming environmental data per second, which sounds like a lot. The body takes in 10 million bits of incoming environmental data per second.
Wow.
So here we have this incredible storehouse of data, which we're not consciously connected to.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that everything that we experience, our entire history, is potentially in the body, but our conscious mind can't access it directly.
Mm-hmm.
So the energy test is, in a sense, talking to that big brain so that the little brain can then make choices based on that new information. And this is, I would say, this is probably the most salient feature of the work, is that modern people have so divorced their mental process from their physical process and their emotional process.
Mm-hmm.
And many people kind of drive their bodies around like a car, washing it at intervals, fueling it when necessary, giving it time off to recover, but really not much more awareness or interaction than that.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the beautiful things about energy kinesiology is it can really begin the process of restoring the trust and the kind of the working together between the brain and the body,
Mm-hmm.
which is so often the source of a big part of our stress.
Wow. What a beautiful, elegant, comprehensive overview. Thank you. And I didn't know that about polio.
Oh, you do? Excellent.
That was new for me.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
Did not know. And thankfully you were able to know that, even though the publication didn't include her name. So someone somewhere recorded that history.
Yeah, I learned that from Richard Duree in a presentation that he made at a kinesiology conference. He had done significant research on that.
Yeah, it could have been personal correspondence or memoir or something. So thank you for that, and for bringing her in more than 100 years later into our lives again. And so a practical example would be to use these muscle fluctuations to gather subtle information about whether your body is leaning in like a yes, or leaning away like a no, or strong like a yes and weak like a no, for various things, right? For like what you might be good to think about or eat, or decisions to make, and so on. So I don't want to say too much, but because it overlaps with my field of energy psychology, and we use similar principles, but for different purposes. Yeah.
Yes, there is that basic intelligence of desire and aversion, and very often the big brain, the body, will be making those determinations of desire and aversion based on instinct, and sometimes based on history and limitation. And it's important to be able to discern the two, because a lot of times we will repeat a pattern that we don't understand consciously. We can be frustrated by it consciously, but we don't understand it consciously because it is being motivated from the past, from the body, and the body's recording of our experiences of stress, how we got through those experiences, and then comparing each new stress to different types of experiences that we've had and bringing out the same response to it, whether it's appropriate or not. This is very often determined by whether or not we are functionally in the forebrain or the back brain, whether we're in fight or flight or whether we're in rest and digest. And the energy test helps us to understand what are some of the things that are providing stress and limitation. And I would say that is more the focus of much of energy kinesiology as opposed to asking questions.
Okay.
It's more offering context to the body. So if I want to find out what's happening in the meridian system, for example, I can use a functional set of points called the moo points or the alarm points. And each one of those points, like for example, I can touch here and test the body, and that will assess, is there a disturbance in the lung meridian? I can touch here. Is there a disturbance in the pericardium meridian? Is there a disturbance in the heart meridian? So in a sense, I'm asking those questions, but what I'm doing is I'm stimulating that context, and the body tells me, yeah, it's fine. There's not much stress there, or the muscle responds because there is moderate to severe stress there.
Okay. So for those of our audience who are listening only, do you want to describe where you touch?
Oh, yeah. So touching just inside the shoulder for lung, which is the lung 1 alarm point, touching in the center of the chest for the pericardium alarm point, at the base of the xiphoid process for heart. So there's a functional set of points that in a sense assesses each one of the meridians for balance.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a disturbance in the meridian that is moderate to severe, the muscle will respond by going weak.
Okay. And then that gives you some clues about the overall health and how these organ systems and meridian systems are connected to one another, and the patterning and the messaging that this brilliant body is giving us. But it's like the brain has to figure out the puzzle pieces and what the message is saying and how to modify it.
Yes, and very often because we go from test to test to test to test, and might jump between systems or from different parts of the same system, and each thing that we test, each context that we give to the body has certain qualities, has certain vibrational signature, whether it's emotional or behavioral or what have you, or the organ function. Different qualities that relate to it. And so as we go from test to test to test, in effect, we're building a story.
Mm.
So third chakra, for example, has as some of its many qualities, power dynamics, anger, resentment, forgiveness, all the digestive organs, our sense of ourself, our ability to make boundaries, our sense of responsibility. So those are just a few qualities. So if that were to come up after, say, lung meridian shows up, lung meridian has to do with how we metabolize grief and loss and disappointment. It may bring up, in an imbalanced state, it may bring up isolation, alienation, loneliness. It can also be part of our protection. It rules the Wei Qi, which is a protective layer of the aura. So we could start to put those two things together. So we have grief, or we have isolation or loneliness, and we have the third chakra. So maybe it's something having to do with, I don't see myself as well connected to other people, maybe because I don't deserve to be, or I'm afraid to get connected to people because then I will feel responsible for them, or I can only feel connected through my responsibilities. Or I get frustrated with people, and then I feel grief over my frustration. The possibilities are endless, and with each correction, it brings more color and more nuance to the story. And I don't know what the person's story is, right? I'm just the translator between the big brain and the little brain. They get to decide what that what parts of the story resonate and what parts don't.
And then you move on with treatment at that point?
Um, there are a couple different ways to do that. Yeah. Very often, we will balance the lung and then balance the third chakra, then look to see what is the next thing that comes up. Maybe it's an electrical correction, balance that. And so each stop along the way contributes to the overall congruence of the picture and also helps illuminate the picture.
Beautiful. And for those who've never heard the word chakra or are confused about what that means and that there's a third chakra, there's a
Yeah.
series of chakras, could you give her just a real quick description of that? And then I'd love to branch into this talk about artistic creativity as well. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So the chakras are an energy system, and an energy system that has a very concrete relationship to the physical body, especially through the nervous system, where the peripheral nerves branch off from the spinal cord, innervate their various tissues, and come together at a nerve plexus. And where we have a lot of electricity that comes together in a plexus, it generates magnetism, and at that point that magnetism begins to turn. So the word chakra in Sanskrit means wheel or vortex, or it implies spinning, and these are energy part of an energy system that does have these stations that move up the spine and into the head that do in fact turn, and there's seven that we think of as the main or primary ones. The third chakra that I referenced earlier is at the solar plexus. And so that solar plexus, that nerve plexus, generates the third chakra. And that also happens to be just if you look at the neighborhood of the solar plexus, that's where you find the stomach and the spleen and the pancreas and the liver and the gallbladder and much of the small intestine and maybe even a little bit of the transverse colon. There's a lot going on there. And the upper border is the diaphragm. So the activity of all those organs can have an impact on the function of the third chakra, and the function of the third chakra can also affect all of the function of those physical components. So it's beautiful also to track the reciprocity between the body and the energy fields, because it's continuous. The dense material of the body is constantly informing the energies, and the energies are constantly informing the dense tissues. And when that reciprocity gets interrupted, or when conflicts arise in the process of that, that's where we get imbalances.
Yes.
And prolonged imbalances then can then degenerate into symptoms and disease states. This is the Reader's Digest condensed version.
That's beautiful. And then I will mention, for those who maybe hear the word aura, AURA, or biofield, interchangeable terms, is the kind of the tapestry that synthesizes everything on the outside of the body into layers that go out, but also is the filter through which information comes in from outside of us. So it's not just a solo player game, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
Donna Eden identifies 9 different energy systems that she sees as distinct, and the aura is one of them. The aura also, we often think of the brain as being intelligent, but not only are all the organs intelligent, all of the energy systems are intelligent. So the auric field is intelligent. So yes, that process of filtration and transmission that happens through the auric field is very dynamic, but it also thinks. It also has intelligence. It never ceases to amaze me in its miraculousness.
And then how we interact as culture, as family, through the internet, to look at all of these different intuitive systems that we maybe use instinctively, but don't necessarily study. Not everyone does. And that you can focus on them. I'm thinking about the illustrator Alex Gray with his like
Oh, yeah.
phantasmical illustrations of these different layers and ways of communicating. And there's people who see energy like Donna Eden. And what I've heard is that when we, in the future, when we have the technology to be able to, let's say, don glasses or go into a state of being where we can see all of this, people are going to be gobsmacked. They're just, it's like everything's going to stop because it's like going to be on this level of fascination just to watch your hand move across, and to see, plants breathing and all of this. So this all goes on just under the surface for so many of us. But these people
Yeah.
have just found ways to distill very specific aspects to be able to promote health and well-being.
Yes, there are clairvoyants among us now, and it's hard to know what percentage they are because so many there are those who don't understand that they're different, that other
True,
people don't see what they see, and there are those that have been chastised for it.
right.
But there are many who believe, and I myself among them, that we have Chinese medicine and we have the wisdom of the Vedas and we have traditional healing techniques because those people were in general clairvoyant or clairsentient or clairaudient. They had these unfiltered understandings of the dog keeps going underneath my legs and bumping the screen.
That's okay. The
They
dog's part of
had
this dynamic conversation of the
yeah,
biofield and the aura, and
yeah,
very
she's
exciting.
going back and forth. So they have these unfiltered ways in which their understanding was so deeply natural,
Yes.
and they were able to observe life on a level of nuance and and complexity, not complication. As I also have had the great good fortune to be a longtime student of Martin Prechtel. And one of the things that he says is that nature is not complicated, she is complex.
Ah.
And so seeing the complexity in the world, all the way down to the motion of the energy and the color and the movement and the sound and the nature of that it's quite likely that the ancients had that and that somewhere along the line we lost that.
We're
So
gaining it back.
we are gaining it back.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to just think about all of this stuff. And it makes life so much more interesting, and complex, but not complicated. I don't know. When
Yeah.
you're first learning it, it feels complicated. Just to learn
Oh,
about the chakras feels complicated, so.
it does. And part of that is because we've, at least those of us in North America, were raised with the understanding of looking at the body in a reductionist way.
Mhm.
And so that's our framework for learning and understanding. And so when we teach about energy, we tend to take it apart into systems and teach it in that reductionist way, which is useful for learning the discrete parts, like learning about meridians and the different the vast body of knowledge related to meridians, and learning about chakras and the vast understanding related to chakras. But the truth is that they are constantly in conversation. All of those systems interpenetrate each other and keep each other vibrant and alive and animated. And there really is no real way to tease them apart.
Yeah, thankfully. So how does this relate to creativity for you as an artist?
Oh boy. Well, I started my professional career after I got out of college. I was a stage designer. I did scenery and lighting for 13 years in the professional theater around in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Mm.
And that gave me an opportunity to really spend a lot of time watching people perform without the pressure to perform myself.
Mhm.
So sitting through technical rehearsals and dress rehearsals, and so watching multiple performances by the same people of the same text within the same ensemble on multiple nights, and marveling at how differently the process unfolded on each particular night, and wondering what was it that made the difference one from another, and why did one actor or one actress have an incredible ability to get deeply connected with the audience, the whole room of the audience, and others seemed to struggle. And so when I began my studies more deeply in energy, I still reflected on that from time to time. And so I did a class for some students at American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, and it was so interesting to work with it was a one-day class, and that was my only opportunity with them. But it was so interesting to see how open they were to the idea of how energy changed the dynamic of their physical body, of their voice, of what they were able to project or not project.
Mhm.
And I would love to would love to have been able to explore that more fully. But I had two little kids at home.
Well, yeah,
And that made things a bit more complex.
yeah.
No, complicated.
Yeah.
Definitely made things complicated. But I never ceased observing that. And my interest drifted more toward visual arts. I did in the late 90s, I did a series of life-size panels on the chakras that I thought I would use in order to teach the chakras. And maybe some of the people who are listening or watching this will be familiar with the rainbow model of the chakras, where red is at the first chakra, and then the colors go up the spine with the rainbow, ending at violet at over the top of the head. And while those colors don't really relate to the chakras per se, because the chakras are constantly in motion and they are moving all kinds of colors all the time, it is a brilliant model for describing the relative differences in the frequencies between the chakras. So, for example, the first chakra, which is at the perineum and kind of goes down through the legs and into the ground, is the most slow, dense, body-related vibration of all the chakras. It's the one that's closest to the earth. It's the one that metabolizes the earth energy in the body. And that is a very different vibration than, say, the third eye, which is often portrayed as the indigo color, which is a much faster moving color and is a vibration that is much less dense. So it is a brilliant model for showing relative density and speed through the visual spectrum, but not one that describes what's actually going on in the chakras. But in the late 90s, I created a set of 7 life-size panels of the chakras that I have used to teach chakras, and I also use in my office, where I'll test to see which panel is most resonant with what the person needs in the moment. So my kids have put up with so much from me. They are body prints on fabric, and then the fabric is then I did art over the print in ways that would emphasize the various qualities of each chakra. And one of the most interesting things that I noticed in using these panels were the first time I took them to do a class. It was just an evening lecture on the chakras. And I had the first 3 chakras were on this side of the room. The fifth chakra was behind me, and that was by design because the fifth chakra rules communication and expression. So I wanted to have that go on for me. And then 7 and 8 were to my left. And it was an evening presentation. And I noticed that the people who were sitting on the side close to the first 3 chakras were kind of really sinking down in their chairs. And the people who were over here by the 6th and 7th chakra would keep putting their hands up. Oh, I have a question. I know I have a question, but I can't quite put words to it. It's like, and they would start to ask the question and they would get really spacey. It was hilarious just to see how the energy moves. So I had everybody get up and change places.
Yeah.
Just to see if they noticed any difference in the sensation in their bodies. It was a very interesting experience that I did not expect.
Was anyone in the audience self-aware to say, oh, I've been sitting by the the lower chakras, so I'm more grounded and sleepy, but then when I moved spaces, I got a little bit more awake and intellectual or something?
Well, I kind of led them to that
Oh, okay.
inquiry. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Fascinating. It makes
So some people might have come to that spontaneously.
on their
I,
own. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, wow. And I assume that so there's the element of the fabric and the intention of the art that was created behind it, and your intention as an instructor. But I'm also wondering if they were somehow primed because you'd already used them. And so they kind of each had their own energy field of intention because of all the people who had used them up until that point.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, I have no way to measure that, but
Yeah.
I would agree that that's probably the case.
That's so interesting. It makes me wonder about going into galleries and museums, going room to room with the different intentions of the audience and the art that's there, or just different things with intentional building of, let's say, sacred altar space or churches and so on. So that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, we have kind of an inbuilt way of relating to fields that have been woven into artwork. And there's a very interesting bit of research, and I cannot remember the names of the researchers, but I read it first in John Briggs' book, Fractals, and this was also back in the 90s, because I'm 100 years old. That's a really long time. So he was reporting on some research done on, lab bunnies. And these are bunnies that are bred for the lab. They have been bred to be blank slates, right? They've never been anywhere. They've never done anything. These are, blank slate bunnies. And so they took the bunnies and they hooked them all up to brain scan wires. I'm not thinking of the right name. So they wire them up. They want to measure what's going on in their brains.
EEG?
And, yes, probably.
Okay.
And they introduce the smell of camphor.
Okay.
So these bunnies have never smelled camphor before, and their brain activity goes crazy. It's very chaotic. It's all over the map. And this was interesting to the researchers, so that, okay, we'll do it again. The next day, same bunnies, same wires, same camphor, still chaotic, but not quite as chaotic. So then every day, same bunnies, same camphor, same wires. And little by little, they got to the point where the introduction of camphor no longer stimulated chaos in the brain. And so they thought that was interesting. And so they tried to design a research project that they could do with humans to see if the same thing would happen. And they found that it did, with one exception. And I think this one exception really speaks to the deep and abiding need for wonder in the world. And that is that the people would habituate to the new stimulation, but they would always have extremely chaotic brain waves when they were in the presence of something that for them was something of depth and beauty, whether it was a piece of art, a recording of a dance performance, a poem, a piece of music, whatever it was that for them was deeply meaningful in a way that created beauty and wonder. Their brain waves never got regular. No matter how many times they've heard that piece of music, no matter how many times they've read that poem, no matter how many times they've seen that picture, every single time there was chaos generated by that beauty and wonder. And humans tend to shy away from chaos because we think it's uncontrollable, but it is where we learn. It's where it's in a sense, it's where we meet the divine.
Yes.
It's a place where there is space for the divine to enter.
Possibility.
And, yeah. So we also have that way in which we encounter art or the beauty of the world or natural settings that is so deeply energetic and and at the same time has really palpable physical consequences.
Interesting, fascinating. And this is why the arts are so important, music, dance, to receive and to create. Yes, both.
Absolutely.
And then when you're an artist, you get to do both. So I just wrote actually a little essay about this, about how an artist moves from the subtle realm where the communication originates in through the body into the physical realm. And so whether it's poetry or dance or whatever it is, a visual medium, sculpture. And then when you look at it or you read it or you smell it or you taste it, then it goes from the physical back into the subtle as you create meaning, reactivity, emotion, association, and so on. So it's this beautiful dance, this weaving that goes on in between the subtle and the physical, recycling itself.
That's lovely. I would love to read that.
Okay. Because I have experienced life through those mediums too, of dance and painting and drawing and so on, and writing. And writing in a very organized, more linear way, like you were talking about the beginning of our discussion, more scientific way, but also in the creative free form of storytelling and personal awareness, that intuitive knowing of the body or the other extrasensory systems that can inform, and spiritual information too. So it's quite active and beautiful and curious and confusing and it's surprising sometimes the things that come out on the page in whatever form.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And and this conversation also makes me think of what Martine Prechtel says about grief. And this culture is woefully inadequate in its understanding and practice of meaningful grief rituals. But he talks about how the only that you can't evade grief, you can't get over it, you can't suppress it, you have to metabolize it, but you have to metabolize it into beauty. And we have this archetype of the suffering artist, which I think is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Because then it implies that all art comes from suffering. I would say suffering, that desire to metabolize grief into beauty through whatever art form. And when I say art, I don't necessarily just mean fine art. Making a beautiful meal is every bit as much of an art as writing poetry, in my estimation.
Expressions of love.
Expressions of love and being creative in expressions of love are a beautiful way to metabolize grief into beauty. And they're also, we also create from joy. We also create from kindness. We also create from wisdom and from hope and from trust and from enthusiasm, and all of the different ways that we generate emotion. We also have a means to flow into creativity. So this idea that this kind of cultural archetype of the suffering artist, I think, does everyone a disservice. It makes it I think it often prevents us from productively moving grief into beauty, but it also gives us the idea that that's all there is in creativity, that if you're not suffering, it's not meaningful.
Yes. What a beautiful testament to life. Because on the Chinese 5 rhythms, the last quote unquote stage, there's no last, but it's grief. But then what does it move into is water, which is the beginning of life. And so to move from grief through to beauty is just a transcendent way of expressing the energies.
Yeah, it is the essence of transformation. And it's the compost that turns into the rich, beautiful flowers and vegetables.
Yes. Oh my goodness, we've been to so many wonderful lands. And I'm wondering, since we're coming to the end of our time, is there anything else you'd like to share?
Oh. So one of the aspects of creativity that really is deeply dependent on the energy, but also on the physiology, is it brings us to that discussion of fight, flight, or fight, flight, freeze, and rest and digest. That one of the crucial things that happens, and often we demonize the fight, flight, freeze response as if it's something that we need to fix. No, we absolutely need that. But what we don't need is to trigger it constantly or often. It should
Or inappropriately.
Or inappropriately. Yeah, it should not fire very often. We should spend most of our time in rest and digest, or rest and refresh, or the relaxation response. So one of the things that happens immediately when we are triggered into fight flight is that the blood flow changes. And one of the crucial places that the blood flow changes is that the blood in the forebrain, which is our ability to have empathy, it's our creativity, it's conscious associative thinking, all of that goes into the automatic action part of the brain, into what is sometimes called the reptilian brain, or the primitive brain, the part of the brain that really does get us out of a jam when our survival is threatened. Because we can't we mustn't reason with the truck that we've suddenly seen after we've stepped off the curb. We have something in our body simply takes charge and kind of somehow manages to throw us back up on the curb so that we survive that encounter. So our response must be instant, but we have very little language in the back brain. And the hormone profile is very much ruled by the adrenals, the stress hormones. So that is a particular type of mindset. And that mindset is very crisis oriented. And where losing your keys can become every bit as big an event as a serious cut with a knife to your finger when you're cooking, and there's blood all over the place. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. All you have is back brain, everything looks like an emergency. So what we lose when we go into that back brain place, when the blood flow leaves the forebrain and moves into the back brain to consolidate around those survival activities, is we can no longer be creative. We can no longer find alternative options or different ways to look at the situation. We can't see others' perspectives. We only react. And even the word react tells us what we're doing. We're acting again in the same way we've acted before that got us out of some other scrape earlier on. So sometimes those responses aren't age appropriate when we launch them, because they may come from very far back. But we can only react when we're in that back brain. So we want to restore that forebrain function. We want to get out of that constant grind of fight, flight, or fight, flight, freeze. For one thing, because it pickles our organs. It causes, it causes things to become acidic, which should not be bathed in acid. So we need to get that blood back into the forebrain. And probably the simplest way is to activate the what are called the main neurovascular reflexes. In some kinesiologies, they call them the emotional stress response points, or the emotional points. And to access them the most simply is just to lay a hand or two hands across the forehead with very light pressure, almost like a butterfly has landed on your forehead. You want to have just the tiniest breath between your skin and your skin. And what this does is the magnetism of the blood in your hand, the iron in your blood that's in your hand, starts to calm the body and draw that blood back into the forebrain, reactivating possibility, reactivating other perspectives, other options, and reactivating creativity. So in those moments where you really don't feel creative, you really can't see another way around it, you really don't see any way through but what's being presented, that's a great time to just take a moment and just lay your hand lightly across your forehead, maybe pay attention to the breath, lengthen your exhale in relation to your inhale, which helps the parasympathetic nervous system become enhanced.
Yeah.
And just see if you can drop into that place of allowing some space before you make that decision, and see if your options don't open up, or see if you don't suddenly have an idea or an insight or a new dimension to the situation that suddenly opens up and unfolds, that creates more possibility and more hope. And not to launch us into the whole discussion, but those of us who live in the United States right now, and especially right when we're making this recording, we're right before the election, but this is true all the time.
Right.
The 24-hour news cycle really is aimed at keeping us in that back brain, where we can only be led, we can't lead, where we can only repeat, we can't create, where we can only react, we can't have empathy, we can't have wonder, we can't question. So it is, when I taught grounding in the 90s, in the early 2000s, I used to say that keeping your energies grounded was a subversive act against the government. But now I would also include that, keeping yourself in forebrain is definitely a subversive act against the culture, because it will give you agency and make you a more creative participant in the process.
I would broaden it and even say that it releases you from imprisonment of any kind.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Whether
I don't think that's too broad at all. I think that's a very descriptive and accurate statement.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I feel like I've walked into a wonderland of treasures. And thank you so much. It's been such a rich discussion and very inspirational. And I love that you gave us just the simplest of techniques to bring that back. I mean, just last night, I remember feeling closed down. And I was coming back from an event, and I walked outside, and I just took a moment to look up at the stars. And I just kind of like put my query into the universe, and I got information back that helped me so much.
Oh, lovely.
It was so beautiful, and it was so simple, and it helped me understand a dream. The dream, I asked for what my next steps were, and the dream that came up was pretty much my life right now. And so I'm like, well, was I too specific with my request? because my next step literally is tomorrow morning. But when I asked to the universe, what I got was a richer answer, and it made me understand that literally my next steps are the unfolding of the next steps, if that makes sense. It's like
Yeah.
I am in the right place doing the right thing, and it's not in a holding pattern or waiting. It is a metamorphosis of the things that are coming. And just because I can't imagine them now in fruition doesn't mean that they won't be here. Because how many times in our life have we said, if I knew this 5 years ago, I never would have believed it.
Oh, absolutely.
And so those are the kinds of wondering and the activity of the brain that I needed to kind of pull me out of that stagnant place. And so thank you for being a spokesperson for that process. And
Well, that's lovely. And thank you for sharing that. It's a brilliant example of the necessity for gestation.
and for opening to possibility in a new way and being surprised, even by the ordinary.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, this has been so delightful. Thank you so much for
Oh, you're very
today.
welcome. I've enjoyed it greatly.
Yes, thank you. Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. If you want to learn more, you can visit my website for podcast and resources at hopshealingtips.com. You can also like, share, and subscribe to this channel. This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only and is not providing healthcare advice. Please seek guidance from your professional healthcare team should you need assistance.